That's what I said into the microphone. 3 words that cut through the sea breeze and the string quartet and the clink of champagne flutes like a church bell in a thunderstorm. It was the 4th of July welcome reception at Egret Key Resort, the island where my family vacations every single summer without fail. The same place they were standing that night, in their linen and pearls and Instagram smiles, while I stood at the microphone with a red hibiscus pinned to my shoulder and a quiet smile that said I had run out of patience a long time ago. The manager's radio chirped. You could watch the colour drain from my son-in-law Carter's face before he even knew why. He feels authority like a draft under a door. Sabrina, my other son's wife, froze with her phone halfway up. She records everything for her lifestyle channel. Ladies and gentlemen, the manager said into the PA, his voice careful and smooth. We have a brief announcement. As of noon today, Egret Key Hospitality, LLC has assumed operational control of Egret Key Resort. Our managing member, Ms. Ruth Ann Calhoun, will say a few words. There was a ripple. People turned. The gulls wheeled. My granddaughter Mia took one hesitant step away from her father. I saw my eldest, David, put his hand on his wife's arm, like he was steadying her, or steadying himself. And I said it again, just for the ones in the back who thought they misheard an old woman on a microphone. Check. The deed. Before I take you back, do me a favor. Hit subscribe if you like a story with receipts, and drop your city in the comments so I know where you're listening from. I read everyone, and I promise this one pays off. Let me take you back to how we got here, and why an 80-year-old cafeteria manager from Beaufort, South Carolina, ended up owning an island resort. 11 months earlier, the heat in August clung like a wet shawl. In Beaufort, the air smells like pluff mud and fried okra, and you can hear fiddler crabs clatter when the tide pulls back from the marsh. I'm Ruth Ann. Most folks call me Ruthie. Some call me Miss Calhoun when they want something done. I turned 80 last November, which is a long time to be underestimated. I carried mail when I was young, tended a school cafeteria for 31 years, and cleaned houses on the weekends when my Jack got laid off from the phosphate plant and then died too young for the pension he'd earned, which is a sentence that still makes my jaw go tight if I think about it too long. I raised 3 kids on casseroles, coupons, and the kind of love that doesn't wait to be thanked. Remember that detail. We live simple here. I have a shotgun house painted the color of a robin's egg and a screened porch where I shell butter beans with the radio low and my knees wrapped in a quilt. I like my coffee with chicory and my Bible verses out loud. I keep a little tin under my bed full of interesting paper. Old letters, receipts, a stock certificate I never could quite bring myself to throw away because the paper felt important. We'll come back to that tin. Remember it. My children, bless their hearts, all left Beaufort one by one for shinier places. My eldest, David, went into software sales in Charleston, married Sabrina, who always smells like eucalyptus and sponsorship deals. My daughter, Lena, married Carter, a man whose suit jackets cost more than my first car, and who uses the word branding the way some folks use blessing. My youngest, Paul, has a quieter soul. He fixes boats up in St. Helena, and he'll show you his care through grease-stained hands and a tank full of gas, not words. They vacation every summer at Egret Key. It's a sliver of an island off the South Carolina coast, a quick ferry ride from the mainland, with oyster beds that shine like silver teeth at low tide, and a resort that looks like the picture in a boating magazine. White clapboards, blue shutters, porches with fans that turn lazily. Egret Key has an annual 4th of July fireworks show that lights up the inlet like a sparkler right in your hands. It's beautiful, it's expensive, And it's the kind of place where the staff know your cocktail order if you tip big, and big tips are the language of God. The thing is, I know Egret Key better than my children do. In the summer of 1968, I took the ferry over and worked as a housekeeper for 3 months when Jack and I were saving for our wedding. It was run then by Mr. Colton, an older gentleman with a cane and a habit of carrying cash in a money clip like a movie star. One afternoon, I found that clip under the bed in one of the corner suites. It was a lot, $1,200. For me then, it might as well have been the moon. I turned it in, and Mr. Colton looked at me like I was a rare bird. He wrote me a letter on hotel stationery, called me the kind of person this place ought to be built on, and handed me a piece of paper I didn't understand at the time, a share certificate in the original Egret Key Development Company. "For your honesty," he said, "and a little stake in a place you took care of." I brought that paper home, tucked it in my cedar chest, and never thought about it as anything but a sweet story and a pretty piece of paper that smelled like old ink. I told Jack once, and we laughed because our stake in anything was usually a rake in the yard and a stake driver in the fence. But sometimes the last thing you place on a high shelf is the first thing that saves you when the water rises. Remember this detail. Fast forward to November of last year. I had decided on a simple request for my 80th. No big party, no fuss, just dinner at Miss Billy's, where the tea is sweet and the hush puppies are hot. I sent a group text 2 weeks ahead with a little heart and a "would love to have supper with y'all Friday." I imagined my grandkids slurping mac and cheese, Sabrina pretending not to like fried anything, and then asking for just one more. Carter telling a loud story that makes him feel important. I even made pecan pies the night before, because I wanted to send everyone home with slices wrapped in foil like we do, because that's how you extend a dinner into a week. Friday came. The sky over the river looked like brushed steel. I put on my good lipstick and my white sweater that makes me feel like my mother when she was happiest. I sat by the window at Miss Billy's, the table set for 8. They refill your tea without asking there. There's grace in a place that sees an empty glass without being told. I waited. On the little TV over the bar, a college game played without sound. A half hour passed. At 6:37 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Running late. Sorry, traffic is crazy." That was from David. A minute later, Lena. "Hey, Mum, slight change. We're going to push our dinner to next weekend, okay? We had a scheduling mix-up. Love you." She added a heart. No call, no voice, just a heart. Then the photo came through on Instagram because my granddaughter Mia had forgotten to block her nana, her daddy and Aunt Sabrina on the dock at Egret Key, sunset like peach sherbet behind them, all of them holding plastic cups with tiny umbrellas, captioned, "Annual Family Weekend, Best Tradition." Best tradition. My throat tightened in a way I don't care for. I sat with all that tea in me and all that air around me and the waitress hovering. She put a hand on my shoulder. God bless her. "You want me to box those pies back up for you, Miss Ruth?" she asked. Her eyes were kind, but pity is a tender poison when you're trying to keep your spine straight. "No, baby," I said. "Cut me a slice and wrap the rest. The sugar keeps, you know." I went home with 4 pecan pies and a silence in my kitchen that had weight. I put the pies in the freezer like I was preserving more than sugar and butter. I sat on the porch because that's what I do when I don't know how to be. And then my phone rang. Mia. "Nana," she said, her voice small. The gulls were loud behind her, and the way voices carry over water has a specific ache to it. "I'm sorry. I thought Daddy told you. This weekend was the only time for the waterfront suite, and Aunt Sabrina has a brand thing. We're celebrating you next weekend, I promise. Mia, I said, keeping my voice like the calm part of a storm. You at the marina? Uh-huh. Put me on video a second, baby. She turned it around and showed me the salt-wet planks, the white boats, the arcs of rope. A musician played an acoustic guitar under string lights, and I could smell the ocean even through a phone, a phantom sense memory. And I said, because I will not let my truth curdle into me. Do you know what day it is for me? She did. Her face fell. I know, Nana. I love you. I know you do, I said. Remember this detail, okay? Traditions should include the people who helped you survive long enough to have them. There was a pause. I heard Carter's laugh in the background, that low bray he uses when he thinks someone is impressed with him. I gotta go, she said. Quick. They're calling me. I'll see you next. The line cut. I looked out at my azalea bushes and thought about how people forget the hands that planted what they pick. I tried not to cry, because tears are a faucet once it's opened, and there was nobody there to bring me a towel. So I sat with it, and I made a decision that sounds small when I tell it now, but it was the first knot in the rope I used to pull myself out. I would not chase anyone to celebrate me ever again. I had chased and chased my whole life. Men, kids, bills, buses, the good plates, enough eggs, enough sleep. I was done chasing. The next morning, I did the thing I do when I need to shake my blood loose. I took the early ferry to Egret Quay. The ferry captain, a woman named Roe, nodded at me on sight because people like me and people like Roe recognize each other after a while. We are the ones who make sure the lights are on and the toilets are scrubbed and the children are fed. And we do it in a way that makes other folks think it just happens. The wind in my hair felt like a rinse. The resort came into view. Crisp buildings, polite money, staff in seersucker and guests in white sneakers that never touch sand. I did not come to cause a scene. I came because there is a kind of quiet you can only find where your heart has been before. I walked the grounds like a ghost. The azaleas by the main house were bigger than I remembered. The bench by the oak was new. Memory is tricky. It stitches things that never touched. I stood outside the corner suite where I had once found a money clip that could have put a car in my driveway and chose honesty instead. The door opened and a housekeeper in a neat navy dress stepped out, gave me a glance, then stopped. "Do you need something, Mum?" she asked. Her accent was Caribbean lilted. "Just looking," I said. "Just looking tends to need permission if you're on this side of the rope," came a voice, and the kind of man who knows the price of everything and the value of very little stepped out of the shadow. He had a name tag, Luis Martinez, General Manager. "Luis?" I said. "You got a minute for an old story?" He did, as it turned out. In the lobby, which smelled like lemon oil and status, I told him about 1968 and the letter and Mr. Colton and the money clip. He watched me the way good managers do, half attentive, half calculating which guest was about to complain on Yelp about the ice being too cold. When I said Mr. Colton's name, his eyebrows went up. "You knew Pete?" he asked. "Mr. Pete, to me," I said. "I knew his handwriting better. He wrote me something once." "You have it." "I do. Paper matters." He laughed through his nose. "You know the old story," he said. "People say Pete lost a wad of cash and a young housekeeper returned it. And he said something about how good places survive because of good people, not the other way around." "That sounds like him," I said, though I do not know if it does, because I only heard him speak 3 times. "Why are you here, Miss Calhoun?" he asked, dropping his voice. He had the weary look of a man who'd had to smile at too many people whose smiles were transactional. "You're not a complainer." "I'm a mother," I said, "and a grandmother, and I don't like being an afterthought. But I know sometimes the place isn't the problem. The people are. Does that make sense?" He sighed and sat back. "More than you know." I left without making a fuss, but I stopped by the Marina Bulletin Board, a place where tide charts and staff notes, and sometimes the truth gets posted. There was an emergency employee meeting notice for the following Tuesday. "Operations update," it said, which is hospitality speak for "we're broke, we're cutting, or we're getting bought." I tucked that away in my mind. Remember this detail. I went home and opened my tin. The stock certificate was brittle, the edges browned like a pie crust left in the oven a minute too long. Egret Key Development Company, common shares 500, par value $2.50, issued to Ruth Ann Beauchamp. That was me before I was a Calhoun. Dated August 19th, 1968, signed by P. Colton. There was an embossed seal that made me smile because I always loved things with seals. They look like they mean what they say. I laughed at myself because 500 shares sounded like a lot until you know what it's of. But on a whim, and because now I was fed up, and the fed up part of me tends to run the table, I called an attorney I know from church, a woman named Addison Ngo, who did pro bono work when the hurricane last year messed up everybody's papers. "Bring it in," Addie said, and there's no woman like a woman in a simple dress and comfortable shoes with a legal mind. She spread it on her desk like a quilt. "You know," she murmured, half to herself, "people think old companies just evaporate when they stop doing business. But if nobody formally dissolves them, they get absorbed. Sometimes their rights get interesting." "How interesting?" I asked. "Interesting like this certificate, combined with Mr. Colton's articles of incorporation, if we can find them, might give you standing to call a special meeting if certain requirements were never amended." Interesting? Like if the resort is in trouble, and the original entity was rolled into the current one without closing certain loops. A minority stakeholder can get a larger say, if they can, show continuity. And I bet you a peach cobbler they didn't, because people in rooms like this, she tapped the wood, forget about the scraps that don't look like dinner. "What made you bring this in, Ruth?" "My family forgot about dinner," I said, and we both let the joke sit there because sometimes your grief is funny for a split second, and that's the only way it doesn't drown you. Addie found the papers. She knew a clerk at Palmetto County who owed her a favor. They went into a basement and came out with a dust-soft file box that smelled like 10,000 old decisions. The old articles were there, stamped and signed. And there it was, in black ink, and a hand that could have been dipping a feather. For as long as Egret Key Development Company, or its successor in interest, maintains hospitality operations on Egret Key's Tracts A through F, any original shareholder holding not less than 500 common shares, or their legal successor, may petition for a shareholder meeting on matters of community stewardship and oversight. It was quaint. It was specific. It had been left unchanged because the men who owned such places never imagined the housekeeper kept her paper. "Holy moly," Addie said, and then, "You in the mood to be stubborn?" "My favourite mood," I said, and I could feel Jack, wherever he is, putting his hand on my shoulder and grinning. We started. The plan wasn't revenge. I do not believe in revenge. The plan was leverage and dignity. There is a difference. Leverage is the tool. Dignity is the reason. We quietly filed a petition to call a meeting. We asked for the current ownership structure under Freedom of Information requests, where we could, and under legal demands, where we couldn't, We discovered that Egret Key Partners, LLC, had been leveraged to the gills, because those white shutters do not keep the sea at bay, and a hurricane can fold a balance sheet like a paper fan. Palmetto Coastal Bank held the note, and Palmetto Coastal Bank had a new VP who had made a risky bet on short-term vacation revenue and now had to make the numbers look like something. Addie had once babysat for the bank president's sister's twins and knew who to call to ask the right questions. Don't ever underestimate church directories and potlucks as a network. It's more powerful than LinkedIn and less smug. I almost hesitated. Almost. Because who did I think I was? 80 and 2 months, a widow, a cafeteria manager with calluses on her feet. The kind of person people pat on the hand and say, "We'll do something next weekend." I asked myself the question you ask when you've been overlooked. If not me, who? If not now, when? And then I took a deep breath and called a friend I hadn't seen in 20 years. Her name is Roberta Lang, but everyone calls her Bertie. She grew up on St. Helena and left to become the kind of woman who uses the word fund as a noun and a verb. She runs Seagrass Conservancy, an organization that buys up fragile coastline and keeps the wrong kind of men from building the wrong kind of things for the wrong kind of reasons. We used to serve ham biscuits together after hurricane cleanups. She saw me when I was bone-tired and still laughed at my jokes. When she answered, she said, "Ruth Ann Calhoun, is that God or a fundraising pitch?" "Neither," I said. "I need a friend who knows how to move water uphill." She listened, and then she said, "You know I don't usually touch hospitality. Too many ways to end up the villain. But there's a way here. If the resort is in trouble and the bank wants out, and if the employees are about to get crushed, and if we can put this place under a structure that preserves the shore and treats staff like humans, we can do it. But it means you, Ruthie. Because donors don't give to spreadsheets, they give to stories. And if the story is the housekeeper who came back, that's a story I can fund." We formed Egret Key Hospitality, LLC, as a public benefit company under the Conservancy's umbrella. We made the employees part of it. Profit share, not just promises. We wrote in a code of conduct that said, people who treat workers like furniture don't get service. Private resorts have private rights, and we intended to exercise them in the service of public decency. We approached Palmetto Coastal Bank and offered to buy the note at a discount with a conservation easement attached. The bank did not want headlines. We did not want headlines. We wanted the deed. And quietly, like dressing in a dark room without waking your husband, we dressed a new reality. I kept my mouth shut. When David texted pictures from Egret Key in December, I hearted them like I was supposed to. When Lena asked if she could borrow my punch bowl for her post-holiday soup soiree, I said yes and taped my name on the bottom, because I had learned that some folks think everything is community property, as long as the community is you. When Paul came by with a sack of oysters and an apology in his eyes that his words never quite outran, I hugged him, and we didn't need words. I swallowed tiny slights like pills. The time Sabrina asked if I might be more comfortable with the grandkids on the back porch, because the noise might be a lot for you. The time Carter told me, "You wouldn't like it at the resort, Ruth. It's a lot of walking." Best to remember those details. One sharp day in February, while the gulls screamed like they do in winter, Addie called. "We have it," she said. "Sign at noon." I wore my white sweater again, the one that made me feel like my mother is still watching me from the far end of the table, proud that I salted the greens just right. We signed in a conference room at Palmetto Coastal Bank under a watercolor of shrimp boats. Men in blue suits and women in black flats. Papers slid. Pens clicked. It is the quietest battles that change the most. When it was done, Bertie squeezed my hand and said, "Go back to the island." The first thing I did as managing member was walk the staff schedule. "Tell me your names," I said, and I wrote them down because names matter. Yolanda at the front desk, Anita in housekeeping with a son at Paris Island, Dan the bartender with the sideways smile who remembered the kind of beer Jack liked without ever having met him because he knows men like Jack. Luis, the general manager who looked like he might cry and then pretended to cough. "We won't be perfect," I told them, "but we will be human." The second thing I did was call the sheriff's office and ask them to explain to me what a trespass notice is and how to do it legally and politely. "You don't have to let anyone on private property that you don't want," the deputy told me, "as long as it's not discriminatory and you aren't violating public accommodation law. You can create a do not serve list for cause." "What counts as cause?" I asked. "Threats, harassment, refusing to follow rules, repeated no-shows for reservations that cost other folks money. Being a jerk does not quite rise to the level, but sometimes being a jerk comes with a charge tag attached." "Good to know," I said. "And what about folks who use a charity to write off their vacations?" "Now that's a whole other department," he said dryly. "You want Consumer Affairs or the Attorney General if it's fraud." I smiled into my coffee. "Because here's another thing. In January, Mia had come to see me, just to sit on my couch and pet Soot, my old cat, with one ear nicked from a stupid raccoon fight 2 summers ago. She picked at the fringe on my Afghan and said, "Nana, I think Daddy's using Aunt Sabrina's non-profit to pay for these trips." I kept my face still because you do not punish courage. "Why do you think that, baby?" "I saw a spreadsheet," she whispered. "It said, Seagrass Families Retreat, Egret Key, Marketing. That's their, cause. Wellness for women. Except the women are Aunt Sabrina and her friends in floaty dresses. And they posted it as a donor activation, which means nothing." "That is something," I said. "Thank you." She took a breath. "I'm sorry about your birthday. I told them we should come home. Daddy said your energy is heavy." I don't know who taught that man that words like that are a self-care language. But if they sold it by the bottle, I'd pour it right out on the ground. "My energy keeps your lights on," I said lightly, so she could laugh if she wanted to. She did. "I love you too much to make you pick sides," I said. "You tell me what you need." "Can I stay the week of the 4th?" she asked. "Just with you?" She was 16, with eyes like her mama's, and a way of asking, like she's asking permission to breathe. "We'll see," I said, "because there are some battles you fight with paperwork, and some you fight with presence, and I had a plan to handle both. Remember this detail." The spring came at the pace it always does. Slow, then all at once. The live oaks got their lime green fuzz new leaves. The resort's bookings ticked up. The gossip ticked up too. "Have you heard?" they said at church. "Miss Ruth owns that island now." I corrected them when they said owns. "I manage a partner," I said. "But yes, I bought a little dignity." They laughed. They brought me pound cakes. They brought their opinions too. "You're not going to use it to punish your family, are you?" one asked, her mouth full of lemon glaze. "I mean, I would. I'd have a whole list. But you wouldn't do that, right?" "Lists are for groceries," I said. "Consequences are for adults." By May, my children had their annual text thread going. 4th of July on the quay," Sabrina wrote, with a fireworks gif. "Let's do a matching linen moment on the marina at sunset Wednesday." I watched the little typing dots, wondering if I should put in my 2 cents. I didn't. I wanted them to plan. I wanted a reason. "Mum, do you want to come?" Paul texted me privately an hour later. "Would I be welcome?" I asked, because I do not barge where I am not wanted, and I don't put my soft parts in the mouths of sharks. "Always with me," he wrote. "Then yes," I said. And I called Luis. "Put me down for a small cottage," I told him. "And tell Dan at the bar I'll be bringing by an old letter to hang behind the bottles, if he wants it." We had worked this part out. A lobby display, modest and true. The letter wouldn't be what made folks decent, but it would remind some. People act differently when they feel watched by their better angels. 2 weeks before the 4th, the email to the guest list went out from owner's desk. "We're excited to welcome you to our Independence Day festivities," it read, with a lovely picture of the pier at dusk. "We've recommitted to the values that built this island: community, stewardship, and respect for the people who keep it running. Please make note of our updated guest conduct policy attached." I wrote that policy myself with Addie over coffee and lemon bars. It said, in plain language, that staff would not be filmed without consent. Your beach chair did not belong to your ancestors, and people who threatened employees or used bigotry or fraud to get perks would be barred. It was half manners class, half legal document. It was my grandmother in paper form. Carter accidentally replied all to that email with, "LOL, the owner sounds like a hall monitor." He meant to send it to Lena alone. I watched the apology email go out at midnight. "So sorry. That was intended for my family only. Our bad." And I put my palm right down on my sternum like I had indigestion. My blood was warm. Sometimes passive disrespect is worse than a shout. You can yell back at a shout. Passive disrespect is a fog you can drown in without realizing it. The week of the 4th, I packed my bag. I put in my white sweater, Jack's navy pin, my mother's brooch shaped like a magnolia. I put the Colton letter in a frame. I slid the stock certificate into a plastic sleeve and tucked it in the folder with the deed. And because I like to be prepared for everything but do not believe in tempting fate, I put a small sealed envelope addressed to my children in my purse, just in case words needed help. When I stepped onto the ferry that morning, a teenage boy was doing a cannonball off the side, and his mother was yelling, "If you break your teeth, we are not going to the emergency room. There is a nurse down the road with a needle and thread, and she will sew that mouth shut." It made me laugh. It made me feel like the world was, on balance, ridiculous and kind. The resort looked the same as it always does in pictures, and not the same as it does when you're the one who knows where the light switches are. There's power in knowing where the switches are. I checked in at the front desk. Yolanda handed me my key with a wink that said, "Are we doing this?" I nodded a little. The breeze off the water kissed my cheeks. I watched my children arrive from the lobby window. 2 giant SUVs, like whales beaching. They spilled out onto the brick half cheerfully, half complaining about the heat. "Mom!" Sabrina trilled when she walked into the lobby, like she'd been expecting a camera to catch her staging. "You made it." "I did," I said. "Nice dress." "It's from a sustainable line," she said. "They plant a tree for each purchase and send you a certificate." "I'm planting a different kind of tree this week," I said, and let that be missed. "Ruth," Carter said, clapping me on the shoulder like I was one of his sales guys. "You can sit with the kids tonight, okay? It's going to be a lot at the reception. Donor activation, content capture, the works." "I'll sit where I like," I said, and smiled like a sharp knife. "Remember this detail." Mia hugged me for real. None of that brittle, rib-only business. "Sunset on the pier?" she asked into my shoulder. "Sunset on the pier," I said. The reception was everything it always is. Ice chests that sweat, Lanterns on shepherd's hooks, patriotic napkins that bleed dye if you're not careful. Dan behind the bar, pouring a beer like a man with a religion. The quartet doing a folksy America the Beautiful, while tiny kids fling themselves like jellyfish at each other's legs. People talking money with their mouths full. Staff gliding like ghosts. I settled myself in a wicker chair near the front, because I do not sit in the back of my own life anymore. "Okay, folks," the manager's assistant tapped a glass. "Welcome to Egret Keys Independence Day weekend. Our GM Luis has a few words, then we'll introduce a special guest." Luis looked at me. I nodded once. He talked about weather and safety and fireworks at 9:30. He talked about the oyster roast. Then he said, "You may have noticed some small changes around the property this week. We've got some bigger news too, and we're going to share it now." And that's when Carter, who has an instinct for attention, like a dog for bacon, stood up with a little half bow and raised his glass. "Before we get to that," he said loudly enough to pull heads, "let's toast to family. Our matriarch is here and she's 80. Can you believe? Strong as ever." He laughed, inviting everyone to laugh with him. "Your age doesn't show, Ruth. In your legs. But in your eyes." He meant it as charming. He thought of it in the car and saved it like a treat. It was the last time that man spoke over me. I stood. I walked to the little stage. The mic was warm from someone else's hand. I touched the brooch at my shoulder, and then I looked at Luis and said, with the ease of someone calling a child in from the yard, "Check the deed." The silence was a beautiful, holy thing. He did. He held it up. "Ladies and gentlemen," Luis said, his voice even, "as of noon today, Egret Key belongs to Egret Key Hospitality, a public benefit company committed to preserving this island and honouring the people who maintain it. Our managing member is a woman who helped build its bones long before any of us could afford to come here. Please welcome Ms. Ruth Ann Calhoun." The applause started slow. It grew like thunder marching into a valley. "Don't clap for me yet," I said into the mic, because I am a stubborn woman who knows a beat. I didn't come to be famous. I came to be plain. I looked at my children, at their spouses, at my granddaughter. "There are two kinds of people in a place like this," I said. "Those who think it belongs to them because they paid, and those who know it belongs to all of us, because we take care of it." Sabrina shifted side to side like she needed a bathroom. Carter smiled, all teeth, and stepped forward like he was going to take the mic back. I held up my palm. "No," I said. "We aren't doing that today." I nodded to Yolanda, who had placed a small envelope beside the dais earlier, the one with the label I'd written. "For now." She handed it to me. I opened it and pulled out the guest conduct policy. "I've asked the staff to enforce this," I said. "It's simple. Be kind. Be honest. Don't make your fun out of people who work here. We have an updated do not serve list. Many of you are wonderful. Some of you are not." I let that hang. "We also have invited a representative from the State Attorney General's office tonight, because some things we discovered while looking through Egret Key's books are bigger than hospitality. If you've used fake charities to fund personal vacations, we are not your venue. We're your mirror." There were murmurs. Phones came out. Dan at the bar stopped mid-pour. I took a breath. I'm not a cruel woman. I am a precise one. "Carter Breckenridge and Sabrina Lake," I said, softly enough that only the first rows would hear at first, then louder when the sound crew leaned me in. "You are no longer welcome on Egret Key property." Carter laughed, like I'd told him he couldn't have seconds at dinner. "Oh, come on, Ruth," he said. "That's cute. You don't—" Luis lifted a hand. Two island security officers stepped forward, polite as preachers. "We'll help you with your things," one said. "We'll process any refunds due." What? Sabrina sputtered, her face pinched. "You can't ban us. We are donors. We are—" "Honey," I said, and I say honey when I am about to serve a hot dish. "You are a human being with choices. You can choose to apologize for how you have behaved to staff here over the past 3 years, apologize for dragging children into filmed content without consent, and call the AG's office to discuss the misuse of non-profit funds. Or you can choose to leave fussing and be escorted by the sheriff after. You pick." "You set me up," Carter hissed. "You petty—" I looked at him until the words died in his throat. "You forgot my birthday," I said clearly enough that the back of the lawn could hear me. "And then you used a charity event to tag a trip under marketing. I did not set you up. You set yourself up. And now you're being stood up straight." He took a step. Security put a hand out. It is a curious thing, watching a grown man realize his power is a costume. "Before anyone asks," I said, turning to the crowd. "No, I do not intend to punish my family. I intend to teach them something I should have taught them sooner. That love without respect is just a habit. Staff at this island are not your props. Mothers are not your backup plans. A woman who has spent her life feeding you does not deserve to eat cake alone." The Attorney General's representative, a woman with flat shoes and a bun so tight it meant business, stepped up with a bland smile. "We'll be in touch with some of you," she said into the spare mic as politely as if she were telling them the lemonade had nuts. "In the meantime, enjoy the fireworks." Sabrina started to cry, ugly. It made me ache. I am not made of stone. David stood, white-faced. "Mum?" he said, voice low. "My God." "Don't say his name if you're not going to mean it," I said. "You knew. You saw the calendar. You chose the dock over dinner." Mia moved like water. She left her father's side and came to me. She is a slight thing with a spine like a radio antenna picking up a signal no one else can hear. She took my hand. "Can I stand with you?" she asked, her voice small in the big salt air. "You always could," I said, and my knees nearly went soft with the relief of it. There is fallout you see, and fallout you don't. The part you saw was security walking Carter and Sabrina down the brick steps while the quartet tried to figure out what song you play when you're being polite about a public removal, and ended up looping something from La La Land that made no sense but filled space. The part you saw was my eldest son crying into his hands, while his wife, who was always more performance than malice, turned her face away from every camera because she finally understood optics. The part you saw was people clapping, some because they meant it, some because they were glad the show was better than the fireworks. The part you didn't see was the emails that landed the next morning because that Attorney General's representative had staff who had already opened a file. The part you didn't see was the bank that called me Mom 3 times on one voicemail, and then once Miss Calhoun because they understood the difference. The part you didn't see was Luis taking a breath for the first time in 2 years. "Mum," David said later, sitting on my little cottage couch with his head in his hands. The cottage smelled like lemon and salt and something sweet because I'd baked a cobbler. I bake cobblers when I have to hold a lot of feelings for more than one person at once. We've been so stupid." "You've been busy," I said, and took his hand, because I am far softer than I pretend to be. "Busy is a choice, so is who you're busy for." "I thought Sabrina was— I don't know," he shrugged. "I thought being important would make me feel like I mattered, And did it? I asked. No, he said. It made me tired. I nodded. Then start doing things that feed you instead of draining you. He cried, the way men cry when they finally ask their own hearts a question and are brave enough to hear the answer. He apologized. It wasn't flowery. It was enough. He said, "Happy birthday," which made me laugh so hard I had to get a tissue. Lena came in like a storm blown off course. "If you wanted to humiliate me, you did it," she said, which is the kind of thing a child says when they have not realized they are not the only person in the room. "Daddy, your husband," I corrected. "Your daddy would have known better." Her face softened. She heard me. "My husband," she said, obedient to that truth. "He's not. I'm sorry." She sat. She reached for my hand and didn't take it. Then did, because she is my daughter, and she knows when to be stubborn, and when stubborn gets you nothing but a hard bed. "Mia is staying with you this week. Carter is going to his mother's house. We will figure things out." "You will," I said. "And you'll do it with a budget and a pencil and a plan that doesn't involve your daughter taking pictures for Instagram at midnight." She nodded, her mouth a straight line. Paul leaned in the doorway. He didn't say anything at first because the men in my family speak when they have something to say, not between. Then, "You did good, Mom." "Thank you, baby," I said, and my heart took a sip of water. I didn't sleep much that night, not because of regret. Regret is a luxury I do not purchase. But because the adrenaline of holding your own line is a thing that takes a while to drain. Around midnight, I walked to the pier. The island sighed. The sky was clean. You could see the fake daylight on the mainland like it was another planet. I heard the hush of the water against the pylons, like someone shushing a rowdy child. I sat at the end of the dock and put my hand in the water. It was cool and clean and indifferent to me and mine, which is soothing when you've been the center of a room for too long. A man sat down beside me so quietly I didn't feel the shift. He wore a cap, hands tucked into his jacket. "Mrs. Calhoun," he said. "Do I know you?" I asked, because I have a good memory, and the ship of my patience was docked for the night. "Not really," he said. He took off his cap. "I'm Pete Colton's nephew. I watched you today. He told me about you once when I was 12. He said, 'You can build a place fancy all day, but you can only build it right once. It's about who you trust when no one watches.'" "Mr. Pete was a kind man," I said. "He also cut corners," the nephew said. "People are complicated. But he'd have liked what you did." "I didn't do it for him," I said, then softened. "But thank you." He nodded. "We never cancelled those old shareholder rights, you know," he said, the amusement in his voice like sugar at the edge of a cup. "Nobody figured the girl who turned in the money would keep her paper." "I keep paper," I said simply. "Good," he said. "We need people like you." The next day, Seagrass Conservancy had 3 new major donors. Volunteers painted the employee lounge with a cheerful yellow instead of that corporate grey that makes you feel like you're inside a filing cabinet. Yolanda brought in a plant that looked like it could survive a hurricane and a toddler. She named it Petey and put a little flag in it. The AG's office delivered notice to Sabrina's Women of the Water initiative, asking questions about retreats and activations and fund allocation. Sabrina's sponsors paused their contracts. Carter's firm put him on temporary leave. We refunded their remaining nights at the resort with a letter that used the word trespassed 3 times and with cause twice. Consequences, not cruelty. By free afternoon, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is your neighbor, Charlotte. I saw the video. You are a legend. There had been phones up. I had known that. I didn't love it. But I also knew that a story like this travels, and in some ways, I wanted it to. Shame curdles in private. Accountability likes daylight. The clip of me saying, "check the deed," hit 1 million views that night on somebody else's account. I did not watch it. I watched Mia fall asleep on my couch with soot curled into the space between her knees, and I watched myself realize something I had forgotten. I could take up space, and the world didn't crack. The fireworks were beautiful. I stood on the pier with my granddaughter and my son, and the sparklers overhead looked like flowers blooming too fast to understand. The sound rolled over the water and back. A little girl near us squealed with every pop. It smelled like sulphur and summer and a little like hope. Days after, bigger fallout began. The AG's office announced an inquiry into small non-profits using funds for retreats that were not programmatic. Sabrina's face blurred in the paper, but identifiable to anyone who knew what to look for. Carter's name didn't appear, but his coaching group that was registered out of a UPS store PO box had its status pulled pending review. There were messages from women who said, "Thank you. My sister cleans rooms, and you saying her name meant something." There were other messages, too, from folks who said, "You're cruel. You broke your own family." People will always say things. If I chased all their words, I'd run out of shoes. A week later, we held an employee town hall in the ballroom. No string quartet, no linen, coffee, donuts, a mic that squealed once and then learned its manners. "What matters to you?" I asked. I wrote their answers on a big pad. Fair schedules. Overtime paid on time. No customers filming us without asking. A helpline that actually answers. We instituted all 4 within the month. We put a sign in the lobby that said, "We tip in cash and kindness. And if you think a sign like that doesn't change a tone, you haven't been to enough places where the tone gets set by very small things very fast." Remember this detail. Then it was my turn to listen to the people in my house. The people who carry my face around on their bones and my temper in their hands. Lena came by 3 Tuesdays in a row at 4 o'clock with iced coffee and Mia in tow. The first time we talked about nothing. Hair, weather, a sale at Belk. The second time she put her head back on my couch and said, "I don't know who I am without the show." The third time she said, "I told Carter he had to leave for a while. He told me I was throwing away our status. I told him I'm choosing our sanity." "Good," I said simply. I didn't dance. I didn't gloat. A marriage is a house, baby. Sometimes you gotta take out the rotten wood and rebuild. Sometimes you gotta call a man to help. Sometimes you gotta tear the whole thing down. But you start by refusing to wallpaper over mold. She laughed so hard she snorted, which is when I knew my daughter was coming home to herself. David took a longer road. Shame is a heavier coat for men like him. It gets hot and hard to shrug off. He sent me a text when a sponsorship deal of Sabrina's fell through. "She's devastated. Please don't say I told you so." I said, "I would never. I told you to wake up." The difference is a chasm that only the person in it can cross. He crossed it by inches. He started coming by to fix things I didn't ask to be fixed. A sag on the porch railing, the cabinet door that always hits you on the hip. He would fix a thing and then stand there like he was waiting for a grade. I gave him lemonade and asked about his day. He cried once, quietly, and I let it be quiet. Silence is not always an insult. Sometimes it's just a room where grace puts its shoes back on. Paul began to let himself be the peacemaker he really is. He took Mia out on the skiff and taught her how to read the water, how the surface tells on the world beneath. You can tell what's down there if you look right, he said. I watched them from the dock with a cup of coffee and thought, yes, baby, you sure can. Around September, we held a founders' dinner at Egret Quay. Not a gala, I hate that word because it makes people put on airs, but a dinner with long tables and food that tastes like itself. There was fried chicken and watermelon salad and shrimp and grits the way you're supposed to do them, and 3 tables full of deviled eggs that disappeared and then reappeared like a magic trick, because women with Tupperware are the closest thing to magic there is. We invited staff and family and donors and the guy from the bait shop who will give you a free minnow if your kid looks sad. I spoke briefly because I'm not running for anything. I did not buy an island to teach a lesson, I said. I did it to remind myself I am not done writing my story. People clapped. People looked at their plates so they didn't cry. People laughed when the little girl who squealed at the fireworks squealed at the deviled eggs and then hid under the table because she was embarrassed. I gave her a napkin and told her she was allowed to be herself here. What I didn't tell anyone until the end, almost as a joke except it wasn't, was that original stock certificate. We had framed it behind the bar, under Mr. Colton's letter. That little paper made a door, I said, tapping the glass with one knuckle. The rest of it was me walking through. And holding it open, Luis murmured behind me. He doesn't hand out praise like breath mints. When he says a thing, he means it. I nodded once and put the praise in my pocket like a peppermint to be enjoyed later. In October, the AG's office announced charges against 3 mid-size influencers for charity fraud. Sabrina was not charged. She had to pay back taxes and dissolve her foundation. Carter's business, which he called Peak Character, lost all 11 of its clients. He moved into a rental in Somerville and discovered what a broom feels like. I felt petty, and then I prayed that pettiness off me. Not because I am holy, because carrying around that kind of satisfaction is like carrying around a sack of sugar in the rain. It melts and leaves you sticky and empty. I didn't unban them. I am not that person. But I did allow my grandchildren, all of them, to come. My house is open to the innocent. Carter and Sabrina can make their apologies when they are ready. The ban is not a forever prison. It is a lock with a key they hold. In November, I turned 81. This time I had supper at Miss Billy's, like I'd planned the year before, and the table was full. My children were late. The baby needed to be changed, and Mia forgot her wallet, and Paul hit traffic behind a truck full of hay bales that turned the entire 2-lane road into a sneeze. But they were late with reasons, not excuses. And there is a difference that matters in a soul. They brought homemade cards, which are what you bring when you are broke or honest, and both are fine. They brought a cake that was too sweet and sang off key, and I cried all over that candle like I was baptizing it. After dinner, we took a walk by the river. The water was black with month, and the sky was a bowl. The lights on the bridge looked like a necklace my mother wore when she felt fancy. "What did you wish for, Nana?" Mia asked. "I don't wish," I said. "I plan." "What's the plan?" "Keep the island," I said. "Keep the people. Keep my dignity. All 3 are work." She linked her arm in mine. "I like this version of you," she said. "This version of me was always here," I said. "She just got tired of waiting in the other room." Every story wants an ending. People want the boo tied tight. They want the bad punished and the good rewarded. That's not how it works in real life all the time. In real life, the bad get bored. The good get tired. You get up. You try again. Some days you throw your hands up and say, "I'm going to bed." Some days you buy a resort. 3 months later, we hosted a school fundraiser at Egret Quay for the public school on St. Helena. It was simple. A barbecue, a silent auction, kids singing, "This land is your land," with hand motions. I made 23 deviled eggs, and they disappeared in 9 seconds flat. I watched a teacher cry when she realized she could order new books for her classroom. I watched Dan slip a free Coke to a kid in a t-shirt that said, "Future Boss." I watched Luis smile without it looking like it hurt. And I walked to the back of the room to where the history of Egret Key display was. The letter from Mr. Colton. The stock certificate. A picture of me in 1968 with my hair piled on top of my head, like a thing that needed its own dress. I put my hand on the glass. "Thank you," I said to the girl I was. "You did me a favor with that money clip." I also said, "I'm sorry I let people forget you for a bit." She forgave me. I felt it like grace. I know some of you are wondering, when did I stop being angry? The answer is, I didn't. I let anger walk next to me until she got tired and told me to go on without her. Sometimes, late at night, I pass that cedar chest and I feel a little jolt, like lightning far off. Not the scary kind. The kind that tells you a storm came and went, and you're still here. If you've listened this long, thank you. I hope you feel seen. I hope you set a table for yourself, even if nobody else sits at it today. I hope you keep your pretty paper, because you never know when the world will expect you to have thrown it away. And if you're still here, and you like a story where an old woman pulls off something everyone thinks she couldn't, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this little island voice carries. And tell me the last moment you chose dignity over drama. Those are the stories that save us. What I didn't know at the beginning of all this was that buying a resort wouldn't end anything. It began something. A woman from the housekeeping crew saved up and opened a little cafe on St. Helena, and half the resort eats there on their days off. The ferry captain, Roe, hired 2 teenage boys who'd slipped toward trouble and pointed them toward dock lines and respect. They broke a sweat and discovered they liked it. The little girl who loves deviled eggs drew me a picture of a firework that looked like a flower and wrote, "Thank you, Ms. Ruth," in pink crayon at the bottom. It's on my fridge between Paul's middle school award for most helpful and Mia's acceptance letter to the journalism program at C of C, because she wants to tell stories that make people better. A last small truth, and then I'll leave you to your day. The first time I went back to the corner suite where I found that money clip, I slid my hand along the underside of the side table because habits never die. My fingers hit something smooth and cool. I pulled out a coin, taped there, who knows when. It was one of those presidential dollars no one uses. Maybe a kid hid it. Maybe a man did. I laughed by myself in that fancy room. I put the coin in my pocket. I bought a Coke with it on the way back to my cottage. It tasted like being 10 and sitting on the back steps and believing you are going to get everything you need if you keep being the person you already are. Remember this detail. The person you already are is enough to build a life on. Fancy is extra. Respect is not. If you ever find yourself on Egret Key, if you get past the ferry and the seagulls and the humidity and yourself, you'll see a framed letter and a piece of old paper behind the bar. You can tell Dan you know me, and he'll raise an eyebrow and say, "Everybody says that." Then he'll pour you something cold, and he'll nod toward the deck. And if you go out there at dusk, you might see an old woman in a white sweater sitting with her granddaughter, watching the sky light up like somebody just couldn't hold the joy in anymore. That woman will look up, and she will see you see her, and something in the world will stitch a little tighter against the wind. End.